Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. A warm welcome to all of you from around the world. My name is Xingyi, and it is my pleasure to be the moderator today. In today's webinar, you will learn about the European Space Agency Parastronaut Feasibility Project and the challenges and opportunities for disability inclusion in human spaceflight. Before we begin, here are a couple of house rules. First, please switch off your camera and microphone throughout the event. This is to ensure the best viewing experience for everyone. Second, if you have any questions or comments, please type them in the chat box. We encourage you to use the chat box as we go along the webinar. Our speakers will answer the questions in the chat box during the Q&A session. Third, to help us improve our program, we would appreciate if you could fill in the feedback form via the link in the chat box before you leave. And last but not least, this webinar is being recorded. You will find the recording on our YouTube channel in a few days' time. You will also find the presentation slides on our website. Now, let me introduce our distinguished panel and the agenda for today. First, Director Simonetta Pippo from UNOOSA will deliver her welcome remarks. This is followed by the UK Ambassador and Permanent Representative Corrine Kitsell, who will deliver her opening remarks. Ambassador Kitsell has been an active supporter of diversity and inclusion for many years. Since 2016, the Ambassador has been a senior sponsor of the Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office, Disability and Inclusion Awareness Network. Next, we welcome Celia Valdo, Chief Diversity Officer from ESA, to give an introduction to diversity and inclusion in ESA. This is followed by Jennifer Noan from the Directorate of Human and Robotic Exploration at ESA, who will tell us more about astronaut selection and human spaceflight. Next, Stefan Geest from the European Astronaut Centre Management Support Office will talk about the Parastronaut Feasibility Project, technical challenges and innovations for accessibility. Following that, Ilaria Sinelli, President of the Aerospace Human Factors Association, will share her insights about space physiology and engineering. Ilaria is also a mentor at the UNOOSA Space for Women Network. Going beyond space technology, Professor Gro Sandel will speak to us about space psychology and team performance. Sandel is a professor of psychology and deputy dean at the University of Bergen in Norway. She is also a leader of the Society and Workplace Diversity Research Group and has conducted research on team resilience in extreme environments. Last but not least, Eddie Nopu will share his dream to be the first wheelchair user to travel into outer space. Eddie is an advocate for the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. Finally, we will end the event with a 15-minute Q&A session. Now, to formally kick off our event, it is my pleasure to invite Director Pippo to deliver the welcome remarks. Director, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for the floor, and also let me welcome you all to this webinar, Pushing Frontiers, Human Spaceflight and Disability. It is really a pleasure to have you with us. In today's webinar touches on a topic that is at the core of the values of the United Nations, which is inclusiveness. Well, inclusiveness is about creating environments that value the differences and celebrate diversity of backgrounds, views, skills, and physical capabilities. However, within the United Nations and in our society, there is still a long way to go for inclusiveness to be a complete reality. There are more than 1 billion people in the world with disabilities. People with disabilities are more likely to experience adverse socioeconomic outcomes. Many disabled people are prevented from joining the wider society in education or in employment due to discrimination, stigma, lack of support and assistance, amongst other barriers. We are simply not doing enough from a human rights and social justice perspective. We must do better. The low participation rate of disabled persons in STEM education and employment is especially acute. STEM fields are known for breaking the boundaries of human potential, ingenuity, and talent, devising new solutions for a better life for all of us. And as we look ahead, the importance of science, technology, and innovation will grow even stronger. 90% of new jobs will require STEM-relevant digital skills. Young people, unskilled workers, as well as vulnerable and discriminated against populations will need help with upskilling. This will require mainstreaming disability, capacity building, raising awareness, but most importantly, equity and inclusion. The roadmap exists in the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, especially, but not only, in goal number 10, reduced inequalities. This goal is a cross-cutting issue impacting all other SDGs, as reducing inequalities within and among countries sits at the core of a sustainable and equitable civilization. The Office for Outer Space Affairs is fully committed to advancing efforts in building the future we want, aligning with the principles and framework of the United Nations Disability Inclusion Strategy. We assign great importance to the availability of space benefits and equitable access to space-relevant education and careers for everyone. Through the Space for People with Disabilities project, we envision to engage these groups in all aspects of space science. Space exploration is a massive endeavor that requires collective effort from the best and brightest. One effective way of doing this is to include more people of different genders, ages, and backgrounds, including people with physical disabilities. I'm thrilled to see that the European Space Agency is leading the way, recruiting qualified individuals with disabilities to become an astronaut. With this pilot project, the European Space Agency has taken the first and critical step to mainstreaming disability, and in doing so, inspires many people with disabilities to pursue a career in the wider space sector. Human spaceflight is one of the most challenging areas in space science, and it is hoped that efforts in this area will spur progress in disability inclusiveness in other areas as well. Well, ladies and gentlemen, today's webinar aims to stimulate discussion about disability inclusion and mainstreaming among the different stakeholders. It is exciting to see so many great speakers join us today, and I'm looking forward to your valuable insights into this topic. It is also a pleasure for me to be joined today by Ambassador Corrine Kitsell from the UK, who is a leading figure on these issues within the UK Foreign Minister. Likewise, thank you to our colleagues from the European Space Agency for joining us today to share ESA exciting activities in this field. And allow also me to extend warm greetings to Mr. Edwin Dopu, who is a UN Sustainable Development Goals advocate and is therefore one of the 17 high-profile individuals who has been handpicked by the Secretary General to raise awareness and support across the UN Sustainable Development Agenda, and by the way, also a very good friend of mine. To all of you, welcome, and let me underline that as we look forward, we must work as a team. Only by working together, we can succeed in building a truly diverse and inclusive space sector for the benefit of everyone. UNOOSA stands ready to develop new projects and initiatives for disability inclusion. Let's start this journey together. And thank you very much for being here.
Thank you, Director. Thank you for framing today's conversation. Now, it is my pleasure to welcome Ambassador Kitsell for her opening remarks. Ambassador, thank you for gracing our event. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and thanks for giving me the floor. And it's great to see so many people here today in this meeting. Let me start by thanking the European Space Agency and UNOOSA and Director Simonetta Pippo for inviting me to provide some opening remarks. The UK really is a proud founding member of both ESA and the UN Committee on the Peaceful Uses of Outer Space, and we're proud to play a strong role in space across Europe and in defining international and regulatory standards through the UN. And as mentioned by Xingyi and by Director Simonetta in their introductions, I've been the senior sponsor in our UK Foreign Ministry for our Disability Staff Network for several years. And in that role, I'm supporting staff with disabilities and health conditions to have the best possible careers that they can have. And in our Foreign Ministry, we recognise that the diversity of our workforce is one of our greatest strengths, and that we need to make the best of the talents of all of our staff. And the UK also seeks to be a leader in championing disability issues globally. And in 2018, the UK government co-hosted its first ever Global Disability Summit with the government of Kenya and with the International Disability Alliance. And that summit brought together more than 1,000 delegates at the Queen Elizabeth Olympic Park in East London. And that was also the site of the London 2012 Paralympics. And I think that hosting the Paralympics was a real game changer for disability issues in the UK. And it showcased amazing sporting achievements. And thinking of amazing achievements in the context of today's webinar, it really is exciting and inspiring that ESA, through their Parastronaut project, aims to open up the possibility of having an astronaut career to a group of people who, until now, have effectively been excluded from spaceflight. And while this is a pilot project, and it's the first time any space agency has taken on a project of this magnitude and this nature, it's nonetheless a fantastic initiative that will, I'm sure, pave the way for a globally more inclusive astronaut corps in all kinds of ways. And this push for an astronaut corps that can inspire inclusion in all parts of the space sector really will, I think, inspire generations for years to come. And in terms of how that inspiration can work, the education and outreach campaign that the UK's space agency ran to maximise the impact of UK astronaut Tim Peake's 6-month mission to the International Space Station in 2015. Tim Peake was the first British ESA astronaut to visit the International Space Station. And the education and outreach campaign saw over 2 million children and 10,000 schools right across the UK taking part. And that was primary schools, secondary schools and post-secondary education. And I hope that the upcoming ESA Astronaut Corps will have the same level of impact right across Europe, inspiring children and young people from all groups in society to consider careers in science and technology, including the space industries. So thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to give a few introductory remarks, and I look forward to hearing from the other speakers today and to hearing the discussion and the questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ambassador. Thank you for the speech. It is our honor to have you with us here today. Ladies and gentlemen, this is now a good time to welcome Acelia Valdo, Chief Diversity Officer at ESA, to tell us more about diversity and inclusion at ESA. Acelia, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for this opportunity, this invitation, and in particular to UNOOSA. And I really feel that I'm extremely grateful, because this is something new that is now really putting together the space community. I would say that disability has never been so prominent like in this period, and I believe that this event is also launching a new momentum, a new chapter, also through the launch of the Parastronaut feasibility project. Something is moving in the right direction, the direction of increasing diversity and in particular enhancing inclusiveness in the spirit of representing more and more in our ideals, in our objectives, the purpose to bring and to reflect society at its large. I would like to present few slides just to give the sense of where we are with respect to the activity at ESA. I don't know, Hyungi, if you have that, you can show it for me. While Hyungi is putting the presentation, let me just start because we don't have much time and we have to leave space for the discussion. First slides, please, just as an introduction to explain that at ESA, we know the value of diversity. There are not so many organizations that deal with a great number of member states, of national organizations, yes, but an international organizations knows already that diversity is an asset, and the richness of points of view, the richness of bringing together different competencies, different angles and backgrounds allow us to do things that no one country will be able to do alone, like for instance landing on a comet at 500 million kilometers from our planet. However, if we know what cultural diversity means, we still have a long way to do with respect to other elements of diversity. Next slide, please. And this is why 4 years ago ESA has decided to put diversity and inclusiveness very high on its corporate agenda. We start because the elements and the axes of diversity are many, but we have started focusing on geography. This is also part of our convention, making sure that there is a balance of nationalities in our workforce. Generation, we are quite an old organization. We have an average age which is very close to 50, and this is something that cannot represent the society in the way we would. And gender, of course, because although space is one of the most inspirational business, we still see that there is a very low attractivity for girls to apply to ESA positions. And then backgrounds. Backgrounds is also something that is coming with the future of work, with the evolution of space activities. But one of the chantier that for us is really prominent now is the inclusion of people with disability. This is not just because it's the right thing to do, but we know this is the smart thing to do. We are sure that any action that will be put in place to include more people with disability will be to benefits of all, and will also bring an ability to think out of the box that is at the core of our business. To be able to imagine and make possible the future needs the ability also to bring together different perspectives with an open mind. So I will focus on disability, on what we have. Next slide, Siangin, please. So we have already started a number of activities. For me, this is one of the most interesting topic, as I said, because we go from 0 to 1, and we are learning enormously from implementing those actions. First of all, we have joined the Valuable 500. The Valuable 500 is an organization that from UK, actually. UK is one of our driver with respect to progress in diversity. I have to say, I have to thank UK for that. And it's an extremely interesting association coming from Davos, from the World Economic Forum, because puts together almost 500 organizations that have disability high on their agenda, and this allows us also to benchmark and go for best practices, learning from each other. In the same spirit with the Aero Forum, which are the 8 research organizations in Europe, we have a special focus on diversity, and in particular on disability. So I'm talking about CERN, ESO, so the major research organizations are also opening up to inclusion of people with disability. We have started 2 years ago recruitment of young graduates with disability in partnership with organizations, with the help of organizations, specialized organizations, and we are increasingly offering opportunities to young people to join the ESA workforce. And then, of course, we are also working on the aspects of not just the visible, the invisible barriers, but also the visible barriers, which are very much relating to accessibility. Let me also say with respect to disability that this year of experience working from remote and the way we will change our way of working can really opening up to new ways of being much more inclusive in the future and not being only relating to the accessibility of sites, and we should exploit the possibility that remote working and digital working can have in enhancing inclusion. Next slide. I only have 5 minutes. Next slide, Samin. So from a programmatic aspect, let me say that in science, so on human spaceflight, my colleagues will dwell in more details. But in science, we have been joining the International Astronautical Union in promoting space and astronomy research accessibility. We had a great event in November, again with ESO, SKO from the Square Kilometers Observatory in the UK, and other organization. The young generation of astronomers, they want to have a science that includes and is accessible also to people with disabilities, and this is bringing great innovation as for instance unification of data. And if we imagine also with respect to all data produced by space activities including Earth observation, if we can make this data accessible to all through sonification, this will be a huge revolution also in terms of business. Next slide. Let me conclude that we are really proud to have been the first space agency to launch this opportunity, the Parastronaut feasibility project, because we want to have, we want to bring those values of inclusiveness as part of the values of exploration. So providing and setting the condition for people with disability to participate to the big adventure of exploration for us is now a must, is an objective. And as we like to say in space, we are all disabled. The space environment is not made for humans. So it's even more our duty to be able to include all in this great adventure. So I leave the floor to the colleagues. Next slides, just to conclude. This is so let me say that the whole campaign, so both the traditional parts and the Parastronaut feasibility project are very much focusing on diversity. And again, we explore at ESA not because we want to conquer or it's a race or it's a supremacy driver, but because it's an occasion to bring our values, our European values into space. And these European values are inclusion, knowledge, taking care of our planets and inspiring the future generation. So I am very glad we launched this today together. Thank you.
Celia, it is wonderful to hear about the high emphasis that ESA puts on diversity inclusion. So thank you so much for the efforts that ESA is putting in. With that, I would like to hand over the microphone to Jennifer to tell us more about ESA's astronaut selection program. Jennifer, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Singi. I hope you can all hear me well. Thank you for the very warm introduction and also for your invitation to this webinar. I'm very honored to be part of this very distinguished panel. Now let me dive right into the matter, and I hope we can pull up the slides. Thank you. What does it take to become an ESA astronaut? The full list of the criteria and requirements, previous slide please, has been published today with the vacancy announcement. But just to give you an overview, and I hope we can go back to the other slide. Applicants must have, as a minimum, a master's degree from a recognized academic institution in natural sciences, medicine, engineering, mathematics, or computer science, with at least 3 years of postgraduate professional experience. That could include working in a lab, conducting research in the field, or working in a hospital. Holding a PhD or an equivalent degree in one of those subject areas are considered as assets, but they are not mandatory. In addition to what you see here, a degree as test pilot and or test engineer from an official test pilot school at master's level is also accepted. Now, in addition to those formal requirements, there are soft skills that we're looking for. As you can imagine, the workload of an astronaut is high and working hours can be irregular. As an astronaut, you need to be flexible. You need to be prepared to cope with frequent international travels and being away from your friends and families for intensive training and preparations. We work closely with many people from many different backgrounds from all over the world, and we are very often confronted with challenging situations. It is therefore really important to be able to work well as part of an intercultural and interdisciplinary team, and to be able to communicate in a clear, concise, and also considerate way. Astronaut candidates need to be able to rapidly absorb and synthesize complex information and make informed decisions. They also need to master the art of remaining calm under pressure, but don't worry, there will always be a strong team behind you. And last but not least, astronauts are some of the most visible ambassadors of our space program. And as such, they should be prepared and willing to participate in public relations, outreach and education activities, sharing their experience and knowledge about ESA and space exploration, and engage wide audiences, especially the younger generation, not only before and during a mission, but also afterwards. Now let me explain to you what a successful applicant can expect and how this astronaut call fits into the overall context of our program. Next slide, please. Successful astronaut candidates will first and foremost be assigned to missions aboard the International Space Station. Next slide, please. Yeah, thank you. On board the space station, they will undertake scientific research. They will install, activate, and test new station elements. And they will, of course, operate and maintain the space station's systems. The International Space Station is one of the most ambitious and most complex research platforms mankind ever made. It's a convergence of science, technology, and human innovation that provides us with the opportunity to collect very unique science data and serves as a one-of-a-kind testbed as we plan to go forward to the moon and onto Mars, as you can see on the right half of this slide. So in the future, astronauts must be prepared to travel farther away from Earth as we prepare for human and robotic missions to the moon and Mars. Together with our international partners, we are already working towards crewed missions towards the moon as part of the Artemis program. The gateway depicted in the middle of this slide is one key element of that program. We're currently defining and building an ESA moon science program, and we will need ESA astronauts to carry it out. So you see the role of astronauts is evolving, and there are a lot of flight opportunities that await us. The new astronauts will not replace our current astronauts, but they will extend the pool of talents that we can rely on and will contribute to make progress in this great adventure called space exploration. Thank you.
Thank you, Jennifer. Thank you for the interesting presentation. Now, it is my pleasure to welcome Stefan to tell us more about the Parastronaut Feasibility Project. Stefan, please.
Good afternoon, everyone. Good morning, good evening. First, let me say that it's a real pleasure for me to be with you today. My name is Stefan Gist. I work at the management office of the ESA European Astronaut Center, which is located here in Cologne, Germany. And as part of my various responsibilities in the center, I'm in charge of the Parastronaut Flight project. And this afternoon, it is in this role that in the next few minutes, I'm going to give you an overview about the main aspect of this exciting project. Jennifer just presented us the astronaut selection campaign. It's a quite long process, as you surely noticed. And in the previous campaign, it led us to select from all over Europe extremely talented people. And in addition to their great intellectual, cognitive, psychological, physical qualities as space professionals, these people are truly excellent communicators. And indeed, the missions keep along the years growing interest in our society. So it is sufficient to observe how the social media and the press around the world follow each of their missions. Although they are not superheroes, it's not that a surprise to see how much they convey an image of perfection. So in the same way that the human space community has opened its door to women already many years ago, it's now the ESA wish to go even further on the path of diversity. And therefore, we want to amplify, to enhance the inclusiveness and fair representation within our workforce, as we believe that diversity is a strength, and we are convinced that we can actually complete this image of perfection that convey our astronauts. That's why we are launching this new project, the FLY project. And with FLY, ESA has the huge ambition to open the door to persons that are fully qualified to be an astronaut, but have a physical disability. But this disability would normally prevent them from being selected due to the strict requirements imposed today by the use of space hardware, for instance. So it is clear that right now we are at step 0, but our strong desire is to make a leap, to go from 0 to 1. And therefore, this project aims at opening professional flight opportunity for those individuals. So it is expected that along the way, the project is going to bring a lot of innovations and many other benefits for the safety, and efficiency of future missions of our astronauts, and of course to our society as a whole. But before we go further, let's stop a few minutes to have a look at some key aspects of the job of an astronaut, because those aspects drove us to select the type of disabilities that are thought to be today, and I say today, compatible with the job. The tasks of an astronaut are multiple and encompass working in a quite complex and confined environment, be it a spacecraft or a space station. For example, the ability to perform manual tasks is key, as the astronauts are constantly required to manipulate experimental devices, from very tiny to extremely bulky instruments, so that they can conduct scientific experiments. And some of those experiments definitely require fine motor skills. Another important aspect is the capability just to communicate verbally or receive verbal commands. On this picture, Luca Parmitano is currently testing an experiment. It's called Simon. It's using artificial intelligence. Actually, it's hidden in the white ball that you see on your left side, and with whom he interacts verbally. So when it is not to run such tests, the astronauts are in regular voice and audio contact with the ground controllers, who, among other tasks, guide and assist the astronauts while running experiments. Also, it is important to understand that most of the tasks an astronaut has to perform, be it an experiment or a repair, a maintenance task, is done with the support of the so-called onboard data files, which actually are procedures. It's a bit similar to checklists that the aircraft pilots use, and they describe step by step how a given task has to be performed. Often, this procedure contains, in addition to pure text, images, video clips, etc. Therefore, it is essential for the astronaut to be able to see, and of course to understand, and hear the supporting information. The previous capability is not only important while working calmly through an experiment, but becomes essential in case of critical phases, as those procedures may contain vital steps to follow in case of emergency. Another aspect, while the astronaut is definitely floating when on orbit, there might be moments during the mission that require the astronaut to move quickly, as for example, if a problem occurs on the launch pad, that may necessitate the astronaut to escape as soon as possible rapidly from the rocket environment, and typically in 90 seconds from the moment the decision is taken. And once having left the spacecraft, the story is not yet ended, as in extreme cases, the astronaut might be required to evacuate to a safe distance from the rocket using slide wire basket, for instance, as you can see on this picture. And of course, similar requirements apply during the landing phase. As soon as the spacecraft has landed to reach the ground or the sea. Now, keeping in mind that three aspects are really critical for us. First, we want our astronauts to be professional astronauts. Second, we want to guarantee a safe mission. And third, we want the mission to be useful. As Jennifer mentioned earlier, we want them to run sound and meaningful scientific experiments. So if we consider that, these science aspects that I just briefly described, and they are completely part of the requirements that any professional astronaut has to fulfill. And if in addition we take into account the current available technology and including its limitation, and the ESA willingness to have an astronaut with disabilities flying in a medium time frame, four types of disabilities have been considered for this current astronaut selection campaign. Those disabilities were identified thanks to the expertise of the International Paralympic Committee. Based on their criteria, we have assessed each impairment category against the criteria needed to perform professional astronaut duties. As a result, the following impairments were selected: single or double foot deficiency through ankle, single or double deficiency below the knee, a pronounced leg length difference, or short stature. So this list of disabilities is our starting point to initiate a feasibility study, which has the ultimate goal to shed the light on the many unknowns that we will have to tackle for a safe and useful space mission. And this study, we will do it in close collaboration with our ESA member states, partner space agencies, and all the stakeholders and industry. These slides give you an overview or a flavor of some of the aspects the feasibility study will address. We are going to consider not only what type of personnel adjustments or modifications might be needed for our astronaut to fly, like prosthesis, for instance, but also what kind of hardware, software modifications, or new devices might be required to perform safe operations. So this might include elements from the spacecraft, the space station, and even the training equipment. So let's pick up two examples so that you understand better the question we need to address. The first one is with the countermeasures. One of the effects of long exposure to microgravity that the astronauts encounter has something to do with the way our cardiovascular system adapts while in space. And this is due to the way the fluids, the blood for instance, inside our body have to cope with a reduced gravity. And this is particularly noticeable after their return on ground, where the system needs some time to readapt to this gravity. The consequences are often dizziness, confusion, and possible loss of consciousness. Thus, without appropriate mitigation, an astronaut suffering from those effects could jeopardize a safe and successful re-entry, a landing, an egress, and in particular in the unlikely occurrence of an emergency. Hopefully, this problem can be countermeasured by maintaining the blood pressure, and this is thanks to a tailor-made garment that maintains that blood pressure. Usually, the astronauts wears it before departing from the space station and keeps it for 1-2 days after the return on Earth to help the organism to readapt to the gravity. Another mitigation system is obtained by asking, actually I should say by forcing the astronaut to regularly exercise on board the space station by using very specific and quite complex devices such that this treadmill. What's the impact of a specific disability on the garment design or the treadmill equipment? And those are only 2 examples of countermeasure systems. It's exactly the kind of questions where the feasibility study will hopefully bring answers. Second example that illustrates the kind of topic we want to address in this study has to do with the spacesuit. As one of its functions, the spacesuit provides air pressure to keep the fluids in our body in a liquid state. In other words, to prevent your bodily fluids from boiling in case of depressurization. It's a bit similar to what may experience the divers. They are quite sophisticated, as at the same time they fulfill several other functions, as providing oxygen, thermal control with ventilation, communication means. What's the impact of a specific disability on the design of the spacesuit? See the picture on the left, see the picture on the right. You understand immediately the point. So these were just only a few examples that illustrate the purpose of the study. It is clear that it's difficult to go deep into that topic within 15 minutes. However, I hope that I gave you at least a flavor about our flight project and how exciting and enriching it will be for our community. So in a nutshell, we really believe that bringing a person with disabilities in our ESA astronaut course will enhance this image of perfection I was talking about at the very beginning of this presentation. I thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Stefan. Thank you for the excellent presentation. It is fascinating to learn about the areas that would need further research before we are able to send a parastronaut to outer space. So thank you for the insider knowledge. Now, let us hear from Laria about space physiology and engineering. Laria, the floor is yours.
So I am Laria Sinelli, a mentor of the UNOOSA Space for Women Network. My talk raises awareness about the importance of an evolving safety culture for including people with a disability towards a mission to Mars. So let's start with the basic of space physiology. Exposure to a reduced gravitational pull leads each individual body system to adapt to find a new equilibrium at different times toward adaptation. In the other picture, you see how a drop of waters readapt and reshape in microgravity, and this is a phenomenon occurring in the human body at multi-scale. On the ground, fluid redistribute and generate in the body a gradient of pressure, and so there are different body regions exposed to a different pressure value, right? And this is a combined action of the force of gravity that push all the fluid towards the feet, and then the muscle that bring and redistribute them in the body. When a person is in space and is exposed to microgravity, these this pressure gradient disappear, and all the body system are exposed to the same pressure value. And so the fluid in the lower part of the body moved towards the upper body of the body, and the body readapt as it was overloaded by fluids. Then the fluid remains in the upper body, and in the upper body region, that causing the puffy face chicken legs syndrome until the body readjusts. There are a specific type of implication of having a very high pressure in the head neck region. And one of these, there are like research shows findings about, of physiological and pathological evidence occurring in part of the astronaut corp, and this is our called spaceflight associated neuroocular syndrome. Astronaut experiences as hypertension and visual impairment. There are more research showing that the brain undergoes adaptation, and there are structural changes in the brain matter. So there are so many phenomena right now, research that are like in discovering right now, and that should be clarified because it is important to know what is happening in the body for assessing very effective countermeasure. And so disability in space. A person with a disability might have a few facilitation in the space environment. But first is skills like adaptability to new environment. It can be reasonable to expect higher in-flight mobility depending on the disability and on the etiology of the same. There are potential less susceptibility to space adaptation syndrome, and the reason is because still, depending on the case, there might be less fluid moving from the legs towards the upper body. However, this is a research hypothesis. It could be reasonable to think about it, but we can be sure about it. And then there are other potential limitations. So all the advances of space, specifically those in relation to safety and space medicine, build on the astronaut population only. And so this population is made by people with higher physical and mental performance comparing to the rest of the population, so regardless of the disability. And so when we include passengers in a space flight that do not fit with an astronaut population, it is very reasonable to expect that safety will improve, will be optimized, and to make sure that all the new risks and odds will be tackled and mitigated to guarantee safety. People that work in safety mainly try to answer questions that sounds like what are the risks that a person might experience in a specific scenarios or while performing a specific task, and how can we mitigate those? So in safety, you identify hazard, you quantify those, and so you find risks. And then you set mitigation strategies by, even writing protocols and procedure for telling people how to do things in space. And there is a part that it was mentioned before in the talk by Stephen, that many different things might slightly readapt or optimize, I have to say. And a part are, for example, educational program, a training program for allowing future astronauts to master their skills. And even like any sort of technology that is not like in-flight technology, but is technology used for, for training people. Back in the history, when engineers has to design, flight suit or procedure, they have in mind a very specific type of a general individual who most of the time doesn't have any apparent disability. However, we can't exclude the new interfaces for allowing people to perform the same task in space. So here you see the image of an astronaut performing physical activity, which is a countermeasure to counteract the body decontaining of the musculoskeletal system. So in case a person with a disability will conduct the same, might need an interface or other technology for allowing the person to reach the same goal while doing the same task in a slightly different way. There are cases that I think are relevant to mention for this talk. One is the astronaut 11 Merlin. He was recruited in the astronaut corps, and he became deaf when he was training in the pool because due to decompression. So there was a malfunctioning of a valve, and he had hearing impairment, and but he didn't. But such episode didn't prevent him to take part in future missions. So he flew in space. And then the case of Stephen had a disease that led him to become a person with a disability, which is a specific case because there is a disease and the disability together. Sometimes the two are not, don't come together. But in this picture, he was in a parabolic flight. And if you don't know those, it's a specific type of flight, and they affect quite a lot. You know, they impact quite a lot the human body. And then there is other campaign, as previously mentioned by the ESA expert. ESA is supporting, you know, inclusion of since like back in the years. This is an image of children with disability experiences weightlessness, lunar gravity in parabolic flight, and this was part of an ESA campaign. So in the aviation industry, the disability are a slightly different matter. So aerospace medical professionals, they adopt a functional health approach, meaning that they assess the risk an applicant represent to aviation safety whenever the applicant's condition or limitation is accommodated. So in aviation, we can talk about medical condition and limitation that embrace disability and impairments. So it's a little bit broader. You know, in space, there are other type of limitation regarding the medical condition. However, let's say that the medical doctor will evaluate the person that is using any prosthesis or any device, and this is the new performance level to evaluate. And so the prosthesis is part of the medical evaluation. In the picture you see from the left, this is Brian Thomas, a commercial pilot. Then we have Jessica, she is a private pilot, and this is an Air Force pilot. All of those use a different type of devices that are optimized compared to those, you know, used for other activities, and this is for allowing full control of the plane. And all of these devices might need to undergo, for example, decompression test or food engineering test, because probably mechanic, you know, just to see if they can function when at a certain altitude. And so for avoiding that any mechanical component or an electrical component can introduce new risks for the pilot. And so about the future of space, there is so much research on the ground. There is supporting, you know, human activities in space, and there is a specific type of setting a training scenario. So there is supporting and enabling future mission on Mars and to the Moon. Those are analog missions, and aims at simulating part of the complexity of the crew mission on the ground and represent a possible future scenario of human life in space. So the fidelity, so the realism of the mission depends on the equilibrium of different parts. So how the health is impacted by the living condition, and with health, I mean physical health, mental health, behavioral health, well-being, all of these different aspects by the location, the environmental condition of the location, and so the temperature, the the altitude, and then the mission design, how the mission is conducted, and the operational aspect of the same. And so, I have to say, there are some limitations. These images are taken from my personal collections, because I've been on a mission quite a lot of different times, and they show the landscape in summer and winter, and then showing you the inside of the habitat. So, you know, when we simulate outdoor activity and extravehicular activity, so future astronauts, for example, doing some surface exploration activity, hiking is a task that is included. And it can be really quite challenging for the most of us, regardless of a disability. And here you see Michael kind of struggling in training. That was a training scenario before the start of the mission. And, you know, like the person in charge of safety in analog mission is the commander, myself. And so my job is to make sure that each of the crew member will receive the same level of safety and in the mission. So before, during, and after the mission. If I cannot guarantee that, that becomes discriminatory. Therefore, the inclusion of people that have disabilities is possible, but there are strong limitations. Another limitation is the habitat itself. The analog facility are like joint labs. They're very hard to, improve or to restructure for accommodating specific needs. It's very, very expensive. And when analogs are run by, by anyone who is not powerful, as for example, space agency are, then it's normal that you can't you can't include people with disability, not because you don't want it, but because you cannot support the expenses, so you don't have resources. So there are different types of scenarios. However, it is possible, and I'm sure it will be possible in the future, to include people with disability on Mars, because it's part of our daily life. And so, answering the question, can people with disability go to Mars? It's a giant yes. But the more appropriate question to ask is, can people acquire disability on Mars or toward Mars? So there are possible future scenarios that I'm keeping in mind when I'm envisioning risks of future missions, and those are, for example, mission in the dark side of the moon, a mission to Mars, mission requiring a higher level of autonomy. And for those who are very technical, a mission with a level of care greater than 3. And so a person with a disability is leaving Earth and going to somewhere in the universe. It's possible. A person is acquiring a disability on the surface of a planet or an asteroid. That's also possible. And a person may acquire disability in re-entry, taking off and landing. All of those are scenarios very important for the medical, for the medical research. And you see, a medical standard tackle and address or limit or delay specific risks, while a robust safety culture tackle risks that may happen regardless of the medical standards, of the experience, of the training, and so on and so forth. So I believe that the evolution of a strong safety culture is the future for enabling the participation of people with disability towards a mission to Mars. And I will expect that there will be more in the incoming years about the transfer of safety and lesson learned from the advances of the space agency back to the commercial activity, because it's a requirement. It's really a strong requirement. And so, conclusion, yes, there are humans in space, but now it's time to bring humanity, because it's a different concept. And people with disability are part of humanity. And so I look forward to see the future steps of UNOOSA. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Ilaria. Thanks for the interesting presentation, and thanks for sharing your insights as an analog astronaut. Thank you. Now, moving to the next topic, please join me to welcome Professor Sandel to unpack the relationship between workplace diversity and team performance. Professor, the floor is yours.
Thank you. So, I would like to start by applauding ESA for the pioneering Parastronaut Feasibility Initiative, and for the commitment to enhance inclusiveness in relation to space. I also want to thank the UN for organizing a webinar on this important topic. Including an astronaut with physical disabilities adds a new dimension to the diversity of space crews. Over the last decades, crews sent to space have become more heterogeneous by including different genders, ethnicities, and nationalities. Pictures such as this of Expedition 64 mark a tremendous contrast to the photo of the crew on the Apollo 8 mission. In the infancy of human space missions, crews consisted of white males with background as test pilots. These astronauts were often portrayed as the right stuff and immune to stress. Questioning their psychological capacities were not accepted or even discouraged. During the Russian-American Mir shuttle missions and the ISS program, the importance of psychological factors became more salient. Together with a more diverse crew compositions, missions became longer and to some extent more complex. All agencies now include psychological countermeasures in mission plannings, the main components being crew selection, pre-mission training, and in-flight support, tailored to the individual needs of the astronauts. It is beyond question that under the extreme conditions of space missions, the crew must be able to interact efficiently and relatively harmoniously, as we have heard in previous presentations. Besides the physical and work-related demands, there are psychosocial aspects that can make it challenging to maintain good team relationships. There is a high interdependence in task accomplishment that may include very complex and safety-critical operations. The crew live for a prolonged period in isolated and confined environments, something I believe many of us have got the feeling of now during the pandemic. There is a constant proximity of the same few people, both at work and during leisure time, and the crew undergo deprivations and separation from regular social networks. Thus, if there is tension, you do not have the possibility to escape or to seek the company of other people like you would be able to do in normal life. So, against this background, it is not surprising that the criteria to become an astronaut emphasize both individual resilience and team capabilities. To date, there are relatively few scientific studies on how differences in crew composition impact on team relations and individual adaptations in space. Access to do research in space is limited and can only achieve limited small sample sizes. Most psychological space research has been done in an environment where people are exposed to many of the same stressors as those experienced by astronauts in space. For example, including people who overwinter on Antarctic space research stations, aviations, space simulation confinement studies, and polar expeditions. As we have heard, each analog may have its strengths and weaknesses, given that not all the environmental factors of space may be present in a particular analog. This is Cato Sahl Pedersen. When he was a kid, he lost his arm, his left and half of his right arm in an accident. For a few years ago, he completed a ski expedition to the South Pole, as well as several climbing expeditions. These and many other tremendous accomplishments by people with disabilities underlines that psychological resilience cannot be inferred from physical abilities. Indeed, there is an emerging research showing that adverse and difficult life experiences can foster psychological robustness later in life. While we know that many people with disabilities may have the psychological resilience necessary to become astronauts, we know less about implications for team dynamics. Disability has been called the silent D in diversity research, suggesting that also in more general settings, very few studies have been conducted, and those that have been done have focused mostly on physical accommodation. However, there are quite a few studies showing that stereotypes against people with disabilities are common. This figure is from a study conducted by some of my colleagues who asked a large group of people to rate different population groups along two dimensions. One dimension of interpersonal warmth and one dimension of competence. As we can see from this graph, people with disabilities were conceived as warm, but less competent than males and females in general that you see to the right. There is little doubt that such faulty conceptions cause discrimination in working life. And it is possible that this could also influence the attitudes of people in the space community, which also had been seen regarding females in the past. Indeed, for a few years ago, it was not uncommon to meet or to hear that females did not tolerate microgravity as well as males. and that they should be protected and stay on the ground. Fortunately, we have seen plenty of examples proving the faultiness of these conceptions by the number of female astronauts with spectacular achievements and also as commanders of space crews. In fact, experience from both space and analog suggests that including females have contributed to a somehow softer, more comfortable and less competitive crew culture. Including members of minority groups may positively impact on team climate. There is also extensive research suggesting that diversity may also benefit performance, in particular in novel and complex tasks, by giving access to a wider range of experiences and perspectives. Group members in different analogs have also emphasized that diversity in backgrounds may be enriching to the social environment. However, as a flip side, people who have different backgrounds may have more problems with getting along. Interpersonal tension is more prevalent in diverse groups. Consciously or unconsciously, we tend to like and trust people who are more like ourselves and be skeptic to people who are different. Negative stereotypes may further act to increase uncertainty. Mutual trust is extremely important for cohesiveness in teams that have to rely on each other in dangerous and risky operations, such as in the case of extravehicular activities, as you see here. So how can uncertainty be mitigated? Pre-mission, I think it's very essential that crew members learn to know their differences and build trust through shared experiences in training. In the case of the Parastronaut, the other crew members need to understand the nature and the effect of the disabling condition. They can and cannot do. The pre-mission training should include a clarification of mutual expectancies to prevent later frustration and miscommunication, or a feeling of being a burden to others. Equally important is to address and correct individual attitudes and conceptions of other crew members. Because, let's face it, obstacles may not be in the disabling condition, but in the mindset of others. Diversity research suggests that visible characteristics become less important as team members work together over time and learn to know each other. Instead, team dynamics may be more influenced by individual differences in personality or in personal values. And in our cult project that we did among crews at the International Space Station, we saw that value differences emerge as a significant source of tension within the crew. Although astronauts often refrained from expressing such feelings openly and had strategies for managing them. Let me see. I once met with Mikhail Kornienko, who at that time recently had returned to Earth from spending 1 year at the ISS together with his American crewmate Scott Kelly. And I asked him, how did you manage to stay healthy and productive during 1 year in space? And his answer was short and simple: Scott Kelly. I think this is a beautiful example that resilience in team does not come from similarities, but from camaraderie, mutual respect, and trust. So I would like to end my presentation by this quote from an interview, again with an astronaut who had recently returned from the ISS. And he said, if people in the crew have their mindset on being on the same page and working together smoothly, then mood will become welcoming. People may have their differences, but if they really have their mindset on working together, everything is going to be great. I think that this is a lovely attitude, focusing more on what unites us than what splits us apart. I strongly hope that the Astronaut Feasibility project will be successful, and I enthusiastically look forward to see the first ESA astronauts with physical disabilities going to space. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor, for your expert insights. Indeed, disability is the silent D in diversity, and we hope that through this webinar, we will be able to bring the conversation to the forefront. So thank you for your presentation. Now, ladies and gentlemen, let us welcome Eddie to talk to us about his campaign for disability inclusion. Eddie, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. I am truly delighted and honored to be here. Thank you to my dear friend Simonetta for the very kind invitation. Let me start by saying something that I think for people with disabilities is incredibly obvious. If there is any segment of society that is most capable of achieving the extraordinary and really doing all of the weird and wonderful things that humanity is known for in terms of human ingenuity, it is people with disabilities. I often say that we are the ones who possess enormous resilience and tenacity and genius and capability. And in many ways, we defy gravity day in and day out without even realizing it. I myself am living proof. At the age of 2, doctors diagnosed me with a really rare and debilitating degenerative condition called spinal muscular atrophy. And those same doctors predicted that I wouldn't live beyond the age of 5. I have since outlived myself by 25 years and counting. And in so doing, I have defied medical science. I have defied the medical establishment. And each day I wake up and step out into the world and hold my head up high as a person with a physical disability, I defy gravity. So in so many ways, space travel is the next logical step for people with disabilities. And I believe that disability is an offering to humanity. It is a gift to humanity, because what disability enables us to do is really step outside existing frameworks of thinking and actually allows us to push the boundaries of the imagination. Those same doctors who predicted that I wouldn't live beyond the age of 5 would never have guessed that one day I would become the first African with a degenerative disability to graduate from the University of Oxford. And history and human experience is littered with examples of disabled people who not only push the boundaries of equality and the boundaries of accessibility, but really push the boundaries of the imagination. And so it is my hope that through this feasibility study, incorporating people with disabilities will enable scientists, will enable leaders to really rethink and revisit existing technology and existing frameworks so that it's not just beneficial to people with disabilities, but the positive externalities, the spin-off effects, the byproducts of inclusion actually then benefits everybody. And it is also my hope that by sending the first para-astronauts out into space, that what that will do is really become a call to action, a rallying cry for public policymakers everywhere to do better on Earth. I think that it will remain an irony if we are able to achieve this feat in outer space, but those same parastronauts are unable to get from point A to point B here on Earth, because public transit is not accessible and because public policy leaders have not done enough to ensure that nobody gets left behind. And so I'm really delighted to be here, and I want to thank you again, Simonetta, for inviting me. I harbor my own ambitions of becoming the first disabled civilian in outer space. And so fingers crossed, I've applied for the first civilian lunar mission that will orbit the moon. And so I hope you'll cheer me on. But again, I think that guts is the prerequisite for space travel. And let me just remind you all that people with disabilities possess guts in abundance. Thank you.
Thank you, Eddie. Thank you for the positive message. We are rooting for you all the way. Now, ladies and gentlemen, we have now come to the Q&A session. The speakers will answer questions submitted to us in the registration form and in the chat. So please keep your questions coming in through the chat. We will answer as many of them as possible. And dear speakers, please join me on screen. Now, first up, we have a very interesting question from Michael. Michael is a retired manager at NASA, and his question is, while I was the Disability Program Manager at Goddard Space Flight Center, there were two underlying principles that guided my efforts to include qualified individuals in the NASA astronaut program. The first was nothing about us without us, and the second was universal design. Here is my two-part question. Question 1. While the initial focus will be on the lower limb and short stature of candidates, will ESA include qualified individuals with those and other disabilities in leadership and decision-making positions? And question 2. Given the length of time and effort it takes to redesign and test both a spacesuit and spacecraft, will ESA plan ahead for the inclusion of qualified individuals with other forms of disability in this research and development project? So this is a technical question, and I will give this question to Stefan. Stefan, over to you, please.
Yes, Michael, thank you for your question, Michael. Yes, you say nothing about us without us. That's our motto as well, Michael. That's for sure. What we are going to do first, we are connected to the community of our colleagues at ESA who have a disability. We are going to work with them because they are in a very good place in order to provide us with the best recommendations. On top of that, you may know that the vacancy notice, yeah. Then let me finish then. In the vacancy notice, we also envisage to hire a person with physical disability to become later on an astronaut, but this person will be part of the team for the feasibility study. So we are going to work with this person to ensure that some basic features are fulfilled. That's a done deal for us. Then about your second question, it's about involving more people, if I have well understood, in management or high-level management decisions ground. And I think we still have to make some. So we are working on that. Also, we have to know that there's no quota at ESA about that because we still privilege. We want the best person for the job. Although we believe also that with such a project, this Parastronaut project, most probably is going to have the people at ESA to open the eyes on what are the possibilities. And I'm pretty sure that it's really going to open the floor for getting the people used to change their mentality. And we are going to have in the future more people in very high level management position.
Yes, thank you, Stefan, for the excellent answer. So now I see another question from the audience, which is related to the first. So perhaps I will take this question first and give it to you as well. And the question is, new needs may arise to people with disabilities that are not directly related to their physical impairment. For example, a person who has physical disability may become cognitively exhausted for having to exert certain coping strategies during mainstream performance, which may perhaps elicit other accommodations. How is ESA ensuring that a person with disability adapt dynamically while allowing to combine their own needs to the current workflow? So thank you to the audience for this thoughtful question, and I'll give this question to you again, Stefan. Thank you.
Thank you. You speak about mainstream performance. If I understand well, it's for me kind of synonym of standard performance on orbit. But as a matter of fact, there is no standard performance on orbit because each and every astronaut just try to do their best and try to adapt. As one of my colleagues was saying just before, somehow we are all impaired if it concerns space, and we need to adapt. So also you have to understand that there is no competition between the astronauts and the astronauts with a disability. At the end, they are all astronauts and they are going to form a team. And we expect also from this team people to help each other, that's for sure. Also, what I would like to add is that this performance that you are talking about might give the floor to a new type of ways for doing things that this new person could bring to the team. Maybe today we are struggling with some aspect of the space flight, but having a person thinking differently, having to tackle some challenges, maybe is going to bring us, and we hope so, new ways of doing things. So in that sense, I believe that it would be very beneficial to have an astronaut with disability flying with our astronauts.
Thank you, Stefan, and I hope Stefan's answer is able to shed light on this question. So thank you to the audience for this question. And now let's move on to the next question. This question is about team performance, and I would like to first give this question to Professor Sandel. So the question is, dear Professor, please elaborate on the differences in team performance between homogeneous and heterogeneous teams. Sometimes homogeneous teams may work better in a stressful situation because they can reach a group decision quickly. And like you mentioned in your presentation, similarities foster trust and higher confidence in teams. But on the other hand, a diverse group could look at the issue from different angles and potentially reach a better group decision. However, this process might take a longer time, and time may not be available during stressful situations, such as during an emergency. Based on your research, which type of team is more effective in stressful environments, and how can we deal with discrimination in the space community? Professor, please.
Thank you for this question, which is not too easy to answer. I must say that I have not compared homogeneous and heterogeneous groups in experiments. But what I know from the literature and partly from our own research is that diversity, yes, it may be very, very good in complex tasks and where people may have different competencies that may be useful in task accomplishment. However, what we see, as the person who asks points out, it is under stress. This is not necessarily the time for using diversity in terms of competencies. So in fact, there is research showing that diversity is not necessarily beneficial in critical situation in which there is very, very little time. But having said that, it's very, very important that in terms of operative teams, such as space crews, people have been trained on beforehand to have a common mindset. And that means that when off-nominal situations occurred, team members are trained to do different parts of the task. And in that kind of situations, the diversity may be beneficial as well. I think there was another question as well. That was in the end.
How do we deal with discrimination in a space community?
That is, let me see, it depends a little bit. For example, in relation to recruitment that is going on right now. I think actually ESA is doing a very, very good job in that the strength related to disabilities is highlighted, as well as the positive factors of including people with disabilities in the crew. So, you know, the disability feasibility project should analyze and give us concrete information about what are the obstacles and what are the possibilities. And I think that is a very good way to progress. But besides that, to work on having an inclusive work environment, I think that is the most important. And an inclusive work environment is an environment in which it is emphasized that differences are actually positive and should be tolerated and respected and taken advantage of.
Thank you, Professor, for the answer. Thank you so much. And yeah, in the interest of time, I will request all speakers to try to limit the duration of your answers. And to all the audience, we are running a little bit late, but I received so many interesting questions from all of you. So if you could just hang out for a little bit longer, while I try to answer a couple more questions. Thank you. Now, the next question that we have is for Jennifer. Jennifer, the question is, evaluating the risk and uncertainties of human spaceflight and disability, can robo-humans be used extensively to capture all knowledge and collect samples and return to Earth? Jennifer, what do you think?
Wow, you receive a lot of interesting questions. So you basically refer to the never-ending debate on robotic versus human exploration. Who should do it? Now, our experience with astronauts and cosmonauts over the past 50 years has shown the merits of humans as explorers of space. Human skills are required to install and maintain complex scientific experiments and to conduct research in space. Many of the scientific instruments sent into space require careful installation and alignment to work properly. And here we have been able to take advantage of human flexibility, intuition, and creativity. Conducting world-class science in space requires skills that I doubt are going to be automated within the foreseeable future. The value of humans in space becomes even more clear when complex equipment breaks down. On several occasions, astronauts have been able to fix and repair hardware in space, saving missions and the precious scientific data that they produce. A very prominent example from the recent past is that during his mission back in 2015, Alexander Gerst used MacGyver methods in space when installing new science material. So to get a material sciences instrument operational, he used shaving cream and a saw to remove a safety bolt that had gotten stuck. And I think that is something that a robot could not have done.
Thank you, Jennifer. That was fascinating. I didn't know that. Great answer. Thank you. And now another question. This is coming from the audience about diversity, and I will give this question to Celia. The question is, ESA's gender balance is not achieved, and you are tackling the next challenge already. What's the overall diversity concept? Thank you.
Thank you for the question. And let me say that there is no place in the world where gender equality is achieved. And, you know, just to give you an example of some recent reports from the World Economic Forum, they say it will take 257 years to get gender equality, and things are just getting worse with respect to the past. So the question of gender equality is big, and although we talk a lot about the issue, doesn't mean that the progress are there. At ESA, the issue of gender has been tackled in the last years, I mean, with great strength, in particular considering that we will never be more diverse, and this also applies to the other category, than the pool of talents that apply to ESA jobs. And so the first things was to be able to increase the number of women applying to ESA jobs. As today, the purpose of this also new campaign is to make sure that we will do better than in the past years with respect to astronauts, meaning that in the past years only 1 over 6 candidates were women, and we really hope that will not be the case. There will be much higher representation in this campaign. So talking about this in general, we have been increasing the number of applicants in 4 years by almost 70% of increase in applicants. We have been able to lower the average age, and we have been having a great results, meaning that in the last 3 years, every year, 40% of recruitments are women. So, and against a share of application of around 25%. So 25% application, 40% of recruitment. So you see the effort, and the effort is not positive discrimination, the effort is not quota, but the effort is, first of all, making sure, I mean, striving for making sure that we give equal opportunities, that we are more sensitive about possible bias also in the language. The language of the vacancy notice, for instance, for the astronauts campaign has been checked by an external expert to make sure that there was anything hidden in the language that could have been more appealing, for instance, to a boy than to a girl, and vice versa. So we are getting much more sensitive to those, as said, invisible barriers, and we have today at ESA 29% of staff are women, and this is exactly the same kind of share that we have in another international research organization, the exactly same share that we have I mean, even more than in the European industry. Let me just tell you this also for the audience, that we are 22 member states, and 60% of applications from women come only from 3 member states, Italy, France, and Spain. So we could have great results just recruiting these 3 nationalities, but because we have to keep a balance in geography, we have to square a circle that is geography and gender, and this makes advancement more difficult in a way in terms of numbers. But for us, what is important is, again, that the progress is there, the momentum is there, and we don't go back on these things. So this is our effort, and I think approaching 30% coming from a much lower level is an achievement. We are still very low in top management position, very low, 12%, and this is also a focus for us.
Thank you, Cecilia, for the great answer. And as you mentioned during your presentation, diversity has many dimensions. It is about gender, it is about disability, it is about generation, and it is heartening to see the great efforts that ESA is taking in all these dimensions. So thank you so much. And now there's another question about analog missions. So I would give this question to Laria. Laria, the question is, how can a person with disability join an analog mission? Laria, please.
Thank you for the question. So, you know, people join analog mission. They are very diverse, and anyone can join. And the reason is because, you know, people are setting the medical criteria and safety standards as daily life. This journal you just apply for in regards of anyone who is applying, specifically for those who may have a limitation or a disability. Please make sure you are in safe hands, and so there is a medical doctor, a trained person that guides you through the risks and make sure that you are safe. We see in the network that this analog mission started looking like as a space camp for adults, but they do not. They are quite serious medical emergency and psychological emergency to face, and so they are real dangers. And I just want to make sure any one of you can apply in any case, but make sure you are safe. If you don't feel you are safe, then don't go. Thank you.
Very good advice. Thank you, Laria. Thank you. And now we have a very creative question for Eddie. Eddie, our audience would like to know, what is the first thing that you would like to do when you fly to outer space?
Wow, that's a really great question. So the original plan has long been to actually deliver a special address to the United Nations General Assembly from space, because I hope that, my aspiration and the ambition is not just for me. I'd be doing so on behalf of a community that is 1.3 billion strong, that is incredibly diverse. So I think I'd really use it to shine a spotlight on the existing issues facing people with disabilities, particularly those of us who live on the in the global South, who encounter many challenges here on Earth. So, I think that's what I'll do, but I'll probably also have like a really great playlist, and I'd probably want to see what it would be like to sip some champagne, and have it float around and maybe get some of that in my mouth. So, yeah, I think that's probably what I'd do.
Thank you, Eddie. These are awesome choices. And do remember to take a picture and send it back to us on Earth. So before we round up, maybe I would just like to take this one last question from the audience. So the audience would like to know, I am interested in space projects for people with disabilities. Are there any activities in ESA or UNOOSA that I can participate in? Perhaps I could get someone from ESA to tackle the question from the ESA perspective, and then I will chip in from the UNOOSA's perspective. Perhaps Jennifer or Celia, who would like to take this question?
I can start, and maybe Ercilia can complement. So we already have and continue to encourage more disabled people to work at ESA. ESA, as was mentioned earlier, is an equal opportunity employer, and we are committed to achieve diversity within the workforce and to create an inclusive working environment. And that is why, as a baseline for all the positions and projects with and within ESA, we welcome applications from all qualified candidates, regardless of gender, ethnicity, beliefs, disabilities, or other characteristics. And let me highlight one important thing. Even if you do not make it to the very end of the astronaut selection process, you may learn through the process that there are other very rewarding places in space science and engineering, in ESA, UNOOSA, in industry and in academia. So you do not need to be an astronaut to be part of discovery and exploration. Ercilia?
Thank you, Jennifer. Yes, that's true. And the way to contribute, as I said, we are launching a number of activities. We open young graduate positions, and we encourage also people with disabilities to apply. And ESA positions are not necessarily all in the STEM fields, can also be other fields. So there is also there a richness of possibilities. And then from the scientific perspective, as I said, the initiatives taken by, and I see that there are among the participants many of the people that also are part of the group engaged in opening up astronomy and science to people with disability. There are many initiatives to follow, and as we said, this community is growing. and needs also points of view that were not considered before. So keep an eye on what we do and see, according to your knowledge and competencies, what would be the best way to contribute. But there are many angles, and some of them can also be found through the website.
Thank you, Cecilia. From my side, in UNOOSA, we are committed to mainstreaming disability in all our programs. And in particular, our Space for People with Disabilities project is leading the way. We work with a range of stakeholders in a wide range of projects. So if you have any interesting idea that you would like to collaborate with us, do send us your idea at our official email address. That's usa@un.org. At the same time, UNOOSA will be opening an internship under the Space for People with Disabilities project, and this internship will be held at the later half of this year. So do keep a lookout at our careers website for more information. So thank you to our participants for all these wonderful questions. I hope we have given you better insights on what is to come for people with disabilities in human spaceflight. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your time. We have now come to the end of the webinar. I would like to thank all our speakers for their wonderful presentations and stimulating discussions. Yes, definitely broadened my thinking about the possibilities for people with disabilities in human spaceflight. So I hope that this webinar will bring about a positive chain reaction and encourage more stakeholders to join us in our efforts to create an equitable and inclusive society. So once again, we hope you have enjoyed the webinar. Thank you for your participation, and we hope to see you again at one of our future programs. This webinar will be available on the YouTube channel. I would be very thankful if you could complete the feedback form before you leave. So thank you and goodbye.